Are the first three verses of the Bible actually a single sentence? Some scholars have made that claim, and quite a few viewers of my video about Genesis 1:1 wrote me comments, sometimes emotionally, saying just exactly that. Basically, what they argue is this. Translating the first word of the Bible as in the beginning, as I did, in agreement with almost all established English translations, is plain wrong. So, do those scholars and viewers actually get it right based on the original Hebrew? We'll explore this in this coming few minutes from a linguistic point of view. And you might be surprised, but actually, in order to answer this question, the main focus throughout this whole video is going to be mostly on just one letter. It's the first of the entire Bible. All those arguments for and against the translation as in the beginning versus when God began to create almost completely hinge on that single letter. Well, this is the star of the episode, the Hebrew letter Bet, which is at the same spot in the alphabet and mostly has the same sound as B in English. So how can a single letter change the meaning of three verses in Genesis 1? To understand that, I need to tell you about Hebrew prepositions. I know it's grammar and therefore sounds boring, but that's in fact the heart of the matter. I'll try to do it as engaging as I can. Let's first briefly go over what prepositions are in English. Essentially, they are primarily connector words like to, from, in, on, at, of, etc. Their purpose is mostly to indicate location, direction, time, and manner. In English, those are usually short 2 to 4 letter words. In Hebrew, however, some of the more basic prepositions come as prefixes, and each of those is compressed into just one letter, which is attached to the beginning of the relevant word. Zooming in on the prefix bet, it most often means in, but also at, and in certain cases also on. For example, ma bakufsa, what's in the box. Here is the letter bet, denoting in the. This same prefix can also refer to time. For example, bo nipagesh beshlishi besheva. Let's meet on Tuesday at 7. And just so that you don't think that this is only found in modern Hebrew, there are countless examples in the Bible. But I picked for you just one verse where this Hebrew preposition appears, indicating both time and place. And Jerusalem is mentioned. So, based on our little grammar lesson, it is no wonder that most English translations over the centuries looked at this first letter of the Hebrew Bible, which is undoubtedly a prefix, and you might get more evidence for that shortly, and read it as in. Consequently, they translated the word Beresheet as in the beginning. But there are those who claim that this same prefix, bet, means something else, when. If this is indeed true, then we actually get a dependent clause. Please look at it. Obviously, we can feel that this sentence is lacking something. It's clearly incomplete. Therefore, the argument goes, the full sentence actually continues in the next two verses. All in all, this new way of reading the first three verses of Genesis gives us a slightly different perspective. When reading the traditional translations, verse 1 is kind of detached chronologically, and the whole sequence of events in the first three verses appears problematic. Verse 1 might be seen as the header of the chapter, but many don't accept this and attempt to find a different way of reading this. Turning Beresheet into when began suddenly makes verses 1 to 3 to be much tidier and more orderly. So when God began the creation, as the earth was in its pre-creation state, Then God gave the order and light presented itself. This is compelling for sure and should also help with the theological reading of the text in general. But again, is this really a valid reading of the original Hebrew from a pure linguistic point of view? Before we move on to answer this, if you like this kind of content and you are new to this channel, I would recommend you to go to the Genesis 1 series, where I go over each word of each verse in the first chapter of the Bible and let you get access to the original Hebrew in the Tanach or the Old Testament without you having to know a single word of the language. A link is below in a pinned comment. And I think that those videos are much more than just a sequence of episodes moving from one verse to the next. Someone told me that this is actually an in-depth course, which it is. So I renamed it Genesis 1 Hebrew Masterclass. You can go and check it out. The first 9 installments are free for everyone. After that, you can access the videos by becoming a member on YouTube or Patreon. I hope you will find the work valuable enough to justify paying about $5 per month, which in turn will enable me to continue that course and to make more videos like this one. Thank you. Back to the first word of the Bible and the question of whether the first 3 verses are actually a single long sentence. One way to explore this is to look at other instances of Beresheet in the Bible and try to deduce what it means. Across the Tanach or the Old Testament, there are only 4 other places where this same word appears with the prefix bet, all of them in Jeremiah. Those verses talk about the beginning of the reign of 2 Judean kings, each mentioned twice. Let's focus on Jeremiah 27:1, which is one of the relevant 4 verses. A vast majority of English translations see this as in the beginning, much like their approach in Genesis 1:1. Other versions use a different phrasing, but it is clear that the reference is to the beginning of rule by the kings. Unfortunately, those other instances of Beresheet still don't give us a clear-cut answer. It's quite a stretch, in my opinion at least, but we can read this as when the kings began to reign. Therefore, this avenue of analysis is, after all, not completely conclusive. Which begs the more direct question, can the prefix bet indeed mean when? Well, it actually can. One example where bet clearly means when is Psalms 114:1. And look, it's the very same letter with the same Nikud as in Genesis 1:1. An even better example is Deuteronomy 6:7. This verse is quite revealing for our purposes. The prefix bet appears here not less than 6 times. 2 of those follow its classic use. The first is translated literally as in your house. The second translates literally in the road. Then there are the other 4. Each of them is correctly translated as when, literally when you sit at home, when you walk in the road, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Therefore, the prefix bet can indeed be seen as meaning when. So potentially, Bereshit can be when God began. But here's the thing. Please note that in all those cases where the translation is when, the prefix bet is attached in front of an action: sitting, walking, lying down, and rising up. The same applies to the previous verse from Psalms we've just looked at. The bet is attached to a verb about coming out of Egypt. Back to Genesis 1:1. Bet is attached to Reshit, which is not an action, but a noun. In fact, the verb basically the action of the verse, is this one, bara, or created. To show you that Beresheet is not an action, let's look at another example of the word in the Bible, Isaiah 46:10. The word Beresheet is almost unanimously translated as beginning, a word that is undoubtedly a noun. By the way, see this word acharit, or end. It actually shares the same grammatical mold as Beresheet and is in fact its antonym. Acharit is a very famous word because it appears in the expression Acharit Hayamim, or the end of days, like in Isaiah 2:2. And again, no action, and is a noun here. Therefore, I think we can conclude that Beresheet is a noun, not a verb or anything similar. And thus, every time the prefix bet is added in front of it, the meaning is in. And this applies to Genesis 1:1 as well. So, I'm sorry, but the when theory is not supported by Hebrew grammar. Again, it can certainly be a totally valid religious interpretation. In fact, this approach was taken by Rashi, who is considered as one of the most authoritative interpreters of the Bible in Judaism. In conclusion, I believe that the first verse of the Bible is not a dependent clause, and the first three verses are not a single sentence. But that's not all. There is another claim about this very letter. Quite a few people believe that Beresheet means in a beginning, suggesting that there were multiple creations, which can have some significant theological consequences. And you know what? They actually have a point. To understand why, we need to look at the Nikud, or those diacritical signs that have the same role as vowels in European languages. And there's a caveat here. Nikud is a much later addition to the text, but at least in Jewish doctrine, they represent the true sound of the letters, which before Nikud was introduced, were passed down orally. For our discussion here, let us assume that Nikud does represent the original pronunciation and meaning. Okay, in order to see whether the text needs to be translated as in a beginning, I'll have to give you another very short Hebrew grammar lesson, just so that you understand what is the thing that we're talking about. I'll try to make it as clear as possible. Well, the prefix bet can have different sounds, and with each sound, its meaning is altered too. If we write it like in Beresheet with two vertical dots, we get be, and this denotes in a. Meanwhile, if we use this T-like symbol under the letter, the bet sounds ba and means in the. This is fundamental in Hebrew, and it is used all the time to this day. For example, with the two dots, this means in a tent, any tent. But if we change this to the other option, then we get in the tent, a specific one that is known to the listener. So since Beresheet has the two dots, it technically should be read as in a beginning. However, there is something important to consider here. Remember those verses from Jeremiah with the word Beresheet? The Nikud in all four instances is shva, the colon-like symbol, just like in Genesis 1:1. And obviously, when talking about a king, a human, his reign begins only once. So based on context, we can see that this might be an irregular or even ambiguous Nikud, but we should be able to rather safely conclude that Beresheet means in the beginning, strongly suggesting just one creation. That's all for now. Please consider subscribing and leaving a comment. Thank you, and see you all again soon.